morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. Today, we're going to have a conversation on construction. We know probably many of you have attended different webinars that have to do with SIRS, with structural integrity reserves. So today we wanted to focus a little bit on that, a little bit on the milestones, but really touch up on construction projects, the potential pitfalls that you could be finding yourself. We know that many condo associations are going to be, if you're not already in it, you should be going through it if you're 3 stories and above. And if you're not, you're probably dealing with some kind of construction project anyway. So I have the great pleasure of having 2 excellent panelists here with us today that are really the experts in the field. So I'll start off here with Frank to do a quick little introduction of yourself and the firm.
Good morning. Thank you, Rafael. Thank you for having me. As always, very, very much appreciated. Good morning, everyone. My name is Frank Soto. I'm the partner, chair of the construction department for Haber Law. We're a boutique firm. We're located in Wynwood. We have several departments. We have a construction department, a condominium department, real estate and litigation department. And look forward to our discussion here this morning.
Great. Thank you for being with us here today, Frank. It's always a pleasure to have you on with us. Next up from Epic Forensic and Engineering, we have Sammy.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sammy. I'm with Epic Forensics, as Rafael mentioned. We are a full-service engineering firm. We can handle all your restoration needs as well as any litigation needs you might have. We've also been handling reserve studies in SIRS as well as Milestones. So we've got anything you need in the house.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sammy. I know this is the first time that we do a webinar together, but we've worked many times with Epic. Super excited to have you on. I've heard you're an expert there as well. So thank you for joining us here today. As for myself, my name is Rafael Aquino. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Affinity Management Services. Here at Affinity, we help community association leaders realize their vision. So we help condo and HOAs all throughout Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, and recently in Collier County. So thank you all for attending another webinar. But I guess enough about us. I think really what they're here to learn about is the construction field, more understanding of how to deal with these projects, any potential pitfalls and so forth. I do want to let our listeners know that the the Q&A is open. So if you have any questions related to the topic, feel free to put it in there and we'll do our best to get to it during the webinar. If we're unable to answer those questions, we'll go ahead and send you an email or reach out to you. Or at the end of the webinar, I will provide the contact information for both Sammy as well as Frank of where you can reach them directly. Or if you need to reach us here at Affinity Management, you'll have our contact information as well. So again, thank you for being here. And let's get started. So Sammy, I want to start the webinar with you. And, with all the construction projects that have either started or about to get started, in many cases, associations and managers alike find themselves in a very difficult situation of, what goes first, the chicken or the egg. So if you can kind of give us a recommendation of if an association is going to get started with a construction project, when should the engineer start to get involved within that project? Is it once they're getting started? Is it if you can give us maybe a 30,000 foot perspective of when they should get started with the engineer?
You should get an engineer involved right when you decide that you want to do a construction project. An engineering firm will come in and do a preliminary evaluation so that we can actually build the full scope of what needs to get done. Because a lot of times there are hidden items such as delaminated concrete or debonding concrete, etc. So there's a lot of things that most board members will not be able to see. So you have an engineering firm come in, do a preliminary evaluation, and then they can build a full scope of work from there. So right off the bat, board makes a decision, construction project needs to be done. You should bring in an engineer right away.
Correct. Yeah. And I couldn't agree with you more. Many times, at least from the management's perspective, board members want to get the construction project off the ground. They just want, hey, just get some bids so we can get an idea of what it looks like. And our immediate recommendation is, look, we need to get an engineer, especially when it's dealing with structure. And obviously things have gotten much more complicated with the new milestones in phase 2 and so forth. So I definitely would agree with you there. Frank, similar from the attorney side, many times I know of mine experience doing this for 16 years. I always say the attorney's brought in too late. But
Right.
when do you think the attorney, right, in an ideal circumstance, if associations had a magic wand, when should the attorney be brought in prior to any construction project?
Yeah, I mean, not surprising. I'm going to say that the attorneys need to be brought in almost immediately. Even before you start considering whether to do a construction project, you should have an attorney to guide you through that whole process, because it really starts even before you have your engineer in place. Because one of the things that the attorney can help you with is um, making sure that you end up with a good engineer, like Epic Forensics, making sure that they're one of the engineers that you're going to be interviewing with. Make sure that they are going to be able to provide you the services that you need. So that's one of the considerations. The other consideration is making sure that when you're going to hire the engineer or the contractor, that your attorney is guiding the board and saying, here are the things that we got to be careful with to make sure we have in our contracts. Here are the things you want to go and ask questions of your engineer. Here are topics. Make sure that you get all these issues answered even before you start interviewing the engineers or the contractors. So because remember, we're talking about a board of directors that are elected by the owners. They're not engineers, they're not attorneys, they're volunteers. And our role as the attorney is to help them and guide them on how to interview, what questions to look forward to, how do you set up your team so that you have everything you need to make sure the construction project goes off as smoothly as possible.
Excellent. So I know, Frank, with you, I know, we talk a lot offline, and I know your specialty is in the construction side. So, dealing with different associations that we deal with on a common, throughout different projects. How involved, or what are the questions you should be asking the attorney? Because in my opinion, it should be someone that's focused on construction, that's going to deal with that construction project. Am I wrong with that assumption?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of when you're trying to figure out what attorney to get, you want to make sure you have an attorney that understands construction. They don't necessarily have to be an engineer in some prior life, but they do have to have a healthy understanding of two major things. One, construction. They have to understand when Sammy is talking about debonding of stucco, they have to understand what that means. When they talk about spalling concrete, they have to understand what that means. What is the significance of that? What are the things that you want to make sure you look for? For example, if you have spalling concrete, well, there may be water getting to your reinforcing steel. There may be a leak somewhere that you want to make sure is being investigated. So your attorney needs to know about that. Second, and probably just as importantly, your attorney has to have an understanding of insurance and coverage, because those two go hand in hand. Whether it is that you're starting a construction project, and making sure that the engineer, the contractors that you're hiring to your project, that they have proper levels of coverage on the insurance side, whether it be through a bond or through a CGL policy. But your attorney has to have a healthy understanding of both the construction side and the insurance side, so that you as a board are properly protected when you're starting this project.
Excellent points there, Frank. And Sammy, I want to bring you back into the conversation. We have the associations that are 3 stories and higher, having to deal with the structural integrity reserves. And then, many associations, as we were talking prior to the webinar starting, you have some associations that are in their construction projects. Excuse me. What's your recommendation? If there is already a construction project done, should they get the SIRS after the construction project, or should they be doing it in the midst of the construction project? What's your recommendation for an association?
Recommendations to get it done as soon as possible. Whether or not you're in the middle of a construction project or not, I highly recommend getting it done as soon as possible. The main thing with the structural integrity reserve study is that we have a cost. So even if you're in the midst of a construction project, you still have a cost. You've got your bid from your contractor. You've already gone through a few change orders. You got a good idea of what the overall project is going to cost. And so that's enough for us to get working on a reserve study for you.
Okay. I have a question here from one of our listeners, and it's Barry. He's asking a question: are you required to have a special inspector designation to do the structural components?
So an SI is required to perform those duties. I see the question here. I personally am not an SI. However, we do have a full team of engineers on staff, in which we do have a couple of SIs on staff. So we're able to perform all those evaluations in-house.
Excellent. I think that reinforces what Frank was saying a little bit earlier of making sure that you have the right team in your corner, because it's no different with management. You know, while we may have a manager that has certain level of expertise within the team collectively, we may have the expertise that's necessary to address the issues or the concerns that a particular association may be having. So Frank, I want to bring it back to you. What liabilities can a board have if they don't protect themselves properly once this, let's say, construction project does start?
Yeah, so any construction project, if there's not certain safeguards at the beginning, it could be a nightmare. There could be all different kinds of things that can happen. One, the project could be delayed. If the project gets delayed, if you don't have certain safeguards in your contract, what recourse do you have? And why is that important? Well, Sammy can talk about this. There's something called general conditions. Well, the longer the project goes on, the higher the general conditions go on. And I've looked at general conditions before, and I'm like, man, this is just kind of funny math to me, but it adds up quick and it becomes very expensive. And as I'm told by contractors, that is one of the biggest reasons why costs continue to go up with those general conditions. And they're impacted by how long or how much farther from the original projected end date the project goes. That's one of the issues. Second issue is, did you ensure that you had a bond on the project? Why is that important? Well, if you don't have a bond on the project and the contractor goes out of business, or the contractor simply decides not to do the work, or the contractor does defective work or deficient work, what recourse do you have? If the contractor is out of business, you're not going to have much recourse. So bonds oftentimes serve as that safety net, as that life, the place that you want to go to and say, well, at least we have this bond that we can go get money for, making sure that our contract is completed. And kind of in line with that, if you don't have those certain safeguards and you have to then terminate your contractor for any number of reasons, well, are you now going to have to pay double the price or triple the price? What about if in the last few years, Rafael, this construction costs have gone incredibly high.
Yep. So
what happens if you now have to restart from the beginning on a new project with a new contractor? Now you're going to pay a premium price. And also, and I can go on, but there's also having protections in your contract. What about it? What if you started a project in 2018, 2019, where construction costs were at a certain level? Pandemic hits, your construction gets delayed, your construction costs now go through the roof, and the contractor comes back and tells you, hey, what used to be $5 a square foot is now $15 or $20 a square foot. Does your contract have any protections in place to make sure that you as an association are protected? Those are just a number of the items that you want to make sure you're protected with.
Yeah, no, those are definitely some great points. And I want to touch off first on that last one. And that was, we did see that drastically. We've all seen it from a personal level and our personal expenses. So on the association side, when wind costs went out the roof, when, raw materials went out the roof. So having those protections, and again, working with a firm such as yours earlier on, you can provide those layers. I do want to drop a pin on what you mentioned about the bond, because we do have managers on this call as well. So could you give us, is there like a ballpark, and maybe Sammy, you could jump in here. Is there a ballpark figure of when you should get a bond? Is there like a number that's known in the industry of, okay, if it's above X amount of dollars, we highly recommend it? What have you seen from your experience, Frank? And I guess, Sam, if you want to chime in there.
Well, I don't know if there's a magic number. When I'm talking to the management team, when I'm talking to a board, depending on the size of the project, if you're talking about a high-end luxury, high-rise type project, the number obviously will be a little bit higher. If you're talking about more of your garden style or lower rises, the number could be different. But if your construction project is over $500,000, you should really consider getting a bond. If it's over $1 million, it's a no-brainer. In my mind, you should absolutely get a bond. So it's that, for my purposes, my discussions with my clients has been, When it's between those two numbers, is whether or not you get it just depends on your appetite for risk. But if it's over $1 million, I think it's almost a must.
Yeah. No, and it does give you a sense of security, at least from a management standpoint, that, if when we're working with, say, with someone such as Sammy and getting them to write up the RFP for the contractor, and out of the gate, we're letting them know, look, they must be bondable. That already, narrows the cone of potential contractors that you can work with. But again, those contractors have the experience, because that's the only way that they can get bonded. They have the financial backing to be able to do it. I'm sure these insurance companies aren't here to pay these bonds out,
Yeah.
so they're doing their due diligence on these contractors.
Let me add one note to that, Rafael, because it's important. What you just said is, I was just thinking about the same thing, because I'm dealing with it right now, where there's a couple of projects that has a bond, but they're not eager to go out there and pay out the claim.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the issue we started off with first, having a proper team, management, your on-site manager, your engineer, and your attorney throughout the entire course of the project, making sure that everything is properly documented, all the issues are properly, photographed, documented, so that when you have to go make that claim to the bond company, they're going to ask you for all that information. If you didn't have a proper team in place to make sure that they're keeping everything in place and be able to turn into the surety a folder with all the issues, photographs, locations, dates, I think that's part of having that team, making sure that you properly document it so you can prevail in your claim, because they're not going to turn around and say, oh, no problem, here's a check from the insurance company.
No, makes total sense. There's definitely some good tips there. And Sammy, I guess when you're preparing the RFP, kind of staying in this pre-stage, pre-construction starting, and then we'll move into construction starting. What are some of the tips and the recommendations that you're providing to your clients, or to the managers, I should say, as well, to make sure that the projects come off without a hitch?
So ultimately, the biggest thing that's important here is hiring a good contractor and hiring a good engineer, and making sure that both can work well together. You're going to get change orders in a project. It's going to happen. There's going to be items that come up as you go through the project. The only way to really avoid that is to increase the scope of the project massively, be very conservative with your numbers, and then have the contractor effectively overbid with what the actual project is. And then what happens is, you've got a project that should cost $4 million, but with all the conservative costs and everything, you end up with a $6 million bid. Now, at the end of the project, it may only cost $4 million, but you still had to get the funding available for the $6 million, whether it be special assessments or a loan or whatever the case is. And it's just, it's a lot to stomach.
Yeah.
And, it's not something I would recommend doing. So at the end of the day, you will have change orders, and it's just a matter of keeping those change orders in line. And then usually with most construction projects, what happens is at the end, you end up having negative change orders for items that don't necessarily, there's not as many of those items. So you get negative change orders for that, you get your money back. So you don't really end up spending too much more than the original bid.
Okay. And I'm assuming, I guess, just for us three know what you're talking about, just kind of give our audience a little bit of a better understanding. So who would confirm that information? So for instance, let's say that, they are given a change order. Is that something that, for instance, your firm would come in and make sure that that what the contractor is recommending is done? And is that typical in your line of work, or is that depending on the contract, I guess, that gets negotiated with you in the association?
Ultimately, it comes down to the contract that gets negotiated between the association and the engineer. But the vast majority of the time, and what we always recommend, is have your engineer review your change orders and review your pay apps. Your engineers are the ones that are on site every time, or not every day, but whatever the agreement is, weekly, bi-weekly, etc. They're the ones that are on site on the swing stages working with the contractors directly. And so there's no better person to review these items for you, the change orders and the pay apps. So
Yeah.
we always highly recommend that those get reviewed and approved by the engineers.
Yeah. Yeah, trust me, I know from the management side, your invoices and the attorney's invoices always get scrutinized. And the perspective I try to give the board of directors is this is a fractional piece of what the entire project is costing you, because there's no way you can expect a community association manager to say, okay, we need to have 7 linear feet of rebar, scraped and bonded and so forth. That's something that really the engineers up on a swing stage, assessing that, measuring it, and we're counting on those professionals. So, that's important. I do want to ask a question for those managers that are on the call. When it comes to, let's say, an overall assessment, because there's different ways to assess a building initially. You have where an engineer is, they can either swing the building or they do it with their binoculars. I know a lot of that depends on what the board, how far they want to go with the initial scope. From Affinity, I know we always try to recommend a deeper discovery so that we can try to get as close as possible to the actual cost, but your change orders do occur. That's part of the process. What's your recommendation? I guess, being in the profession as long as you have been, what's your recommendation with that initial assessment?
Give your engineers as much opportunity to investigate as possible. You may end up spending a little bit more on the front end, but your bids will come back more accurate and your final cost of the project will be more accurate. We can do an evaluation with binoculars standing from the ground, but we're very limited. A stain on the side of a balcony slab edge may look like a crack. It's hard to tell. We're gonna lean a bit more conservative and say, yeah, it's a 5 linear foot crack. And then once we get up there, it's like, oh, it's some staining. No, there's nothing here. It's fine.
Yeah.
So getting the engineer an opportunity. In an ideal situation, we would swing every building before construction, but that's not always feasible.
Yeah.
So at the very least, giving your engineer an opportunity to hop on some balconies and sound stucco. Do a little bit destructive if necessary, if they see something that's peculiar, but give them the opportunity to do a detailed investigation for you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and I highly recommend, I guess, as a golden nugget for our listeners is, bring the engineer into these pre-meetings, have them express what they're doing, have them at least be able to present the 2 options. Look, this is the basic discovery that we would do, rough estimates. We're going to, I know from my experience of dealing with different engineers, they always cushion it a little bit to give themselves space. But ultimately seeing what the cost is to fully swing it and see if that gets you closer to what the true number is. Frank, I want to bring you back into the conversation here. So, from the legal side, what protections can you put within the agreement? Timeline is always a problem, especially in South Florida. We're dealing with hurricane season. We're dealing with rainy season in the summer. So it's very challenging for all 3 of us, right? But is there any language that we can put into the contract that really can rein in the time that it takes to complete it? Because, it's difficult for residents, especially the snowbirds that are coming in, that, they can't use their balcony and they feel like they're back in COVID again when they can't go out, but it's part of the process. But is there anything that you would recommend to managers or boards to put into these agreements?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like a multi-front approach. One, you want to make sure you have proper communication with your engineer and your contractor in those meetings and say, well, what project are we undertaking? Are we doing, for example, a garage repair? Are we doing balcony repairs? Are we doing a roof repair? Depending on what project it is, will determine, one, how much time it should take and how intrusive it'll be to the owners. And then try to figure out timing-wise. You said, Rafael, we have, in certain buildings, we have snowbirds. So do you want to do it what they call during the off season? If you can, do you do it, or can you do it during peak season, which oftentimes will impact your timeline for getting the work completed. In terms of the contract, there's certain provisions you can include. Delayed damage provision, meaning that if you go past this certain date, the contractor owes the association X number of dollars, and that gives them a financial incentive. Of course, what happens, and Samuel will be the first one to tell you, if the contractor will come in and say, well, wait a minute, we had X number of rain delays because this is an occupied building. This owner didn't let me go in, so I need to extend my time and extend it here and extend it there. So while there's plenty of provisions that you can put into your agreement to protect against the delay of your project, to me, one of the first things you want to do is making sure that you have a proper, realistic timeline that you're creating with your engineer, with your contractor, really with management. Management is critical to that, because management is not only dealing with me as the attorney, with Sammy as the engineer, but you're also dealing with the board of directors. You're also dealing with the actual owners who are not on the board, but want to, tell you, hey, why are these people on my building? And the managers oftentimes are the ones that know what are the best times of the day, of the year, of the month to do these projects. So working collaboratively with your whole team and creating a proper time frame will help. And then include in the agreement. We would have included in the agreements protections, but the protections will only get you so far, because there's always an exclusion to every exception.
Of course. No, and I'm glad you brought up the thing of the managers, because it is an important aspect to think of, especially for boards and even for managers alike. I try to tell my managers and those managers that are here, you need to speak up. If you have a heavy load at your property, and now you have a project going on, you need to have an open and honest conversation with your board of directors, letting them know, look, how are we going to manage this? In many cases, we would want to recommend the engineer needs to be on site more, so that they can report back and really be on top of the contractor. One of the tips that we like to provide is making sure that within the agreement that you're negotiating, that there's reports that the engineer is going to provide back, so that it alleviates the manager from having to put these update reports that are necessary. But from both a board as well as from the manager's perspective, it's important that you have those open and honest conversations, because if you have a lot going on within your community, this is definitely going to tack on an additional load. So if you can't handle it, it's okay. You got to speak up. There's project managers, or the engineer can step up and provide additional hours, so that the operation of the association doesn't stop. It needs to continue. So it's paramount to have that strong communication. So I want to keep it one more time with you, Frank, because Sammy spoke a lot about the change orders, and I know that's a big thing in our world. It's one of the hardest things for us to be able to manage and even communicate, even though, all parties, when you have good partners, are working well together, communicating well, but it's difficult to relay that information. Is there anything from a contractual standpoint that you put into the contract, or is this just, part of the game, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, if the next time I see a project that doesn't have a change order, will be the first time I see a project that doesn't have a change order. And really, again, I say this all the time, it's communication. And we're, when we talk about the contract, we're talking about really two separate agreements, right? The first agreement is with your engineer. And that when you contract with the engineer, again, what I said at the beginning is making sure that the attorney that you have in place has a understanding of construction, so that you can have a meaningful discussion with Sammy and say, well, Sammy, look, why don't we put into a Excel spreadsheet the entire property, and let's randomly select locations so that we can get a representative sample of the building. And let's not waste time with investigating certain things that are simply not showing up. Or, one of the hot topics now is post-tension cables. Well, sometimes you don't have to go look for a post-tension cable if you don't have any bleeding out of the caps, or you don't have any ghosting, or you don't have any signs of it. Well, then why are you going to rip holes into the side of your building? So those kind of conversations you want to have, because that impacts their investigation, so they can then create the scope. That scope will then be sent out to a contractor who's going to go ahead and bid against it. So the better information that Sammy and his team have to send out to a contractor, and then that contractor is bidding off an actual, what I call a real project, a real bid. Then when the change orders, that it will always come, but when they start coming in, you can be a little bit more, you can push back a little bit more and say, wait a minute, that was in the bid documents. You contracted based off those bid documents. You can't hit me with a change order because this is part of your original price, or it should have been. And if you didn't do it, then that's really, it falls on you. The second thing that you must do, and again, this is in collaboration with management, this is in collaboration with your engineer, when you get the bids from the contractors and you have one bid that is, incredibly lower than all the other bids, be careful, because they may not be including things like, a swing, or the equipment that you need. And you're like, wow, this, I'm getting it for such a discount, but then they're going to hit you with 100 change orders within the first 60 days of your project. So contractually, there's a couple of provisions you can include in your contract to make sure that you can protect against it, and making sure that the bid that is being submitted and awarded is encompassing of the actual project bid that was put out. Those provisions can be put in there. But again, it's a more holistic type of approach. It starts from the very beginning when you start doing your investigation to the time that the bid project is put together to the time that you receive the bids. That's how you protect against those change orders. But at the end of the day, like I said, you're going to get them in every project, because it's impossible for a contractor to know every single potential thing that can happen in any construction project.
Of course, no, those are excellent points. And sticking to that here, Sammy, I have a question from Marsha. What's your recommendation with drone inspections? Is it a viable thing now that we're trying to avoid those change orders, even though what I'm hearing is that it's almost impossible? What are your thoughts there?
We can do drone evaluations as far as a visual evaluation goes. And we started using those on some of our milestone projects as well. And obviously nothing beats putting a hammer to stucco.
Of course.
But it definitely beats being on the ground with binoculars and getting a crook in your neck. So, we do offer drone services here. And so we will go to a high-rise tower and just fly the drone methodically up and down the building. And we're able to see the slab edges in 4K. It's fantastic.
Excellent.
It's great technology, and it's great that we're able to utilize it.
Excellent. And I have a question here from Dominic, I get on the milestone portion, and he asked, a milestone inspection report is valid for 5 years. Is that correct?
I believe it was a 10-year requirement. Mm-hmm. We do recommend having a paint project every 5 years, which I would also recommend having an evaluation of my engineer at that point. But the most you can go is 10 years.
Okay, excellent. And now I want to ask you, Sammy, keep it with you. We've gone through this construction project. What are the typical warranties that are provided, or what are you seeing in the field? I know a lot of it. Let's generalize the question so everyone can grasp it. With regards to the warranties, are there normally warranties that the contractor's directly providing? Are there warranties that maybe the product that's being applied? What are you seeing in the field? And then I also want to get an understanding of, has the market changed ever since, now these new regulations? Have the warranties gone down? What are you seeing so far in the market when it comes to that?
All the above. You get warranties from your manufacturer. You get warranties from your contractor as well. A contractor typically includes 1 year labor and material, and the material, it depends on the manufacturer of the material. For example, waterproofing systems for roofing. Most manufacturers will give you a 5-year warranty, some a 10. I know Roof Pro in particular, they're the only ones that'll give you a 20-year warranty on their product. But part of that includes having a manufacturer rep come to the site, do an evaluation on your substrate, and make sure that the material is being applied properly, so that they can actually give you the warranty that's required. So you get warranties from all sites. You're pretty well protected there. Now, part of the contractor warranty is negotiated at the beginning of the contract before the contract is ever signed. So.
Okay, excellent. And then Frank, I guess from your side, is that something that you're working on earlier on as well to understand? And, are there any details that our managers or board members should know of what they need to keep in order for those warranties to stay in place? And, if there's anything from the engineering side, feel free to chime in there as well, Sammy.
Yeah, no, that at your contract negotiation stage, you want to make sure that you're understanding what those warranties are. Manufacturer warranties, work warranties, the labor warranties. What are they? And you want to get copies of it. You want to review that and find out, how do you submit those warranties? Is it a cumbersome process where you have to basically take DNA samples and send it out somewhere, or is there a procedure in place? Some of the bigger companies, I won't mention the names, but some of the bigger companies have warranty department, and they quickly process those warranty claims. Some of these other companies, it's like a black hole. You submit a warranty and then you get lost in the process, and that's part of why, again, be careful with what you buy. And you know, sometimes a really good deal on certain material is not that great if the warranty that you're buying is not really worth much. So those are, you want to negotiate those at the beginning. Not only negotiate it, but you want them to provide you copies of the warranties, get an understanding of what's covered, what's not covered. Are there any exclusions in those warranties? You can negotiate those. You can negotiate for an additional time. If your project has specialized components, I was recently working on a project where they have a balcony railing system that is unique in nature. So you want to make sure that you have an extended warranty on that, not just the traditional 5 to 10 year. You want to make sure it's a longer warranty because it's a highly specialized product that you're getting. So those are things you want to get at the very beginning and make sure you understand how to process those.
Right.
Excellent.
Go ahead, I want to mention something going off of what Frank was saying regarding knowing the process of filing a claim. It's important to know what activities would cause your warranty to be invalid. You know, if you've got a roofing membrane that's not supposed to have high vehicle traffic or whatever the case is, and then all of a sudden you're putting a loader up top or whatever vehicle you may want to put up there, it's going to invalidate your warranty. You damage the material, you're 5 years into your warranty and a 20-year warranty, you damage it, manufacturer comes out, you did some activities that aren't inside the stated warranty. Okay, your warranty's invalid. You're done.
Yep.
You know, so it's just as important to know the limitations of your warranty and what would invalidate it, and that also includes having unapproved contractors doing work on that roof.
That makes sense. You know, between what both of you said, it just really goes to show the value of having the right partner in your corner. Because, you know, what Frank had mentioned of you know, it being a black hole with some warranties, he already has inside information. With you mentioning on the high traffic side, Sammy, it goes to show like, okay, these are the questions that should be asked by the right professional during the initial stages, and that way you're making the right selection for your association. So I have a question here for you, Sammy, that comes from David, and he's asking, I guess, similar to the question that I asked with regards to bonds, is what's the financial level or the financial cost, I would say, for recommending a contractor to have oversight?
I'm hesitant to give a financial number.
Yeah.
Number. For me, it's more about the level of involvement in the project itself. Are you swapping out one air conditioning unit for another? Yeah, go for it. You don't need engineering oversight. Are you replacing your RTU? Yeah, we'll definitely recommend engineering oversight on that.
Yep.
So it really just comes down to the level of involvement. And at the end of the day, there's no harm in picking up the phone and calling an engineering firm. Like, hey, what do you think? Do you think your involvement is needed? Or if you don't want to directly call an engineering firm, you can go to your manager, such as Affinity Management Services, or call your attorney. Whoever you want to give them a call, they can always provide some more insight regarding that.
Correct. Yeah, I would agree with you there, Sammy, 100%. You know, there are some certain smaller projects, as you mentioned, that does require the engineer. And there are some projects that are small that don't. But a high majority, again, managers, I'll speak for managers because that's my world. You know, we want to be said that we need to know how to do everything. And the reality is that our role is to facilitate, to really find the professionals such as the two of you to really support us, that we can lean on. And that's, you know, why it's important to work with the right organization, because then they'll have the right relationships to be able to assist in making that call. And I can call Sammy and say, hey, Sammy, look, this is what we're thinking of doing. What are your thoughts? And there's not going to be a direct charge to us. Now, if Sammy needs to go out, different story. But, you know, these are the conversations that we can have with our partners so that they can guide us in the right direction. So, Frank, you know, associations, unfortunately, lawsuits are part of the process. Not always. Hopefully, if you've done things right from the beginning, you're not dealing with it. But how common have you seen where associations maybe have to sue the contractor during these construction projects? And why do you typically see these kinds of lawsuits? Why do they pop up?
Yeah, I mean, look, it happens. It happens in all different types of buildings with all different types of contractors, and the reasons could be um, a multitude of reasons. It could be just bad work. It could be that they put in a superintendent that just didn't know what he was doing, or lacked the experience to do. You put a superintendent that is by trade a great roofer, and you're having him do a garage repair. So it depends on the circumstances there. Does it happen often? You would hope that it doesn't, because really, filing a lawsuit, and everybody close your ears because I'll deny ever saying this, but filing a lawsuit is really the last option when you're talking about a construction project. It really is. The impact that it has on the owners, because now your project is delayed, because when you're suing your contractor, chances are the work is now stopped. Yep. If you're suing your contractor, your work is stopped, and now if you have to get another contractor, you have to worry about, well, what do I do with the permit? I need to go back to get a new permit, take out a new permit with a new contractor. Starting again, the work they did has to be corrected. Now the cost of all this goes up. So again, does suing your contractor happen? Yes, I've been involved in numerous cases in which I've represented associations where they have no other choice but to sue their contractor. The one thing I will say is, if you're getting to the point where you're even considering having to sue your contractor, do it quick, do it decisively, and do it and don't wait, because the longer it goes, the worse it'll be. The longer your project is going to go, the more money you're going to be spending, the more complicated it'll be, the more damage is going to be caused to your property if the contractor is not doing a good job. Chances are that if your contractor is not doing a good job, they're not going to all of a sudden in the middle of the project say, you know what, I'm going to start doing a better job now. I figured out how to do it. So it happens. It's unfortunate. It's not the first thing that you want to do. You want to try to make sure that it doesn't happen. And again, I don't want to continue to harp on the same thing, but it all really starts at the very beginning. If you have the proper legal team, if you have the proper engineer, managers involved, and you do a proper selection of the contractor, it shouldn't happen. You shouldn't have to sue your contractor.
Yeah, you bring up great points, Frank. I mean, I would agree with you in those challenging times where maybe there's a disagreement or you're not seeing eye to eye. The right thing to do is just be level-headed. I think many times, unfortunately, their egos or personalities get in the way. No one's perfect. So I think the important thing is to have a sit down, have an honest conversation, and bring in the partners, bring in everybody to that discussion. Okay, look, this is the challenge that we're having. What can we do to fix it? Bring the facts to the table. Many times we get wrapped up in one little thing. Oh, everything's going wrong. The reality is that not everything's going on. This particular issue is what's happening. How do we address it? This is what the engineer says. Give me facts. Attorney, these are the facts. Contractor, management, and try to work through it, because, having to stall a project middle of the way and then going through a lawsuit and then having to bring in another contractor to accept what that other person worked, if you are not able to work it out, it's just definitely not fun at all for any party.
Well, one war story that I'll share with you is I was called into, I was hired up for a particular association that had their railing system had to be repainted. Mm-hmm. The paint on the railing system was chipping and flaking, falling off. Reached an agreement with the contractor. The contractor said, we'll go ahead and repaint all the balcony railings. Well, the contractor decided to start painting the balconies from the first floor going up. So imagine, as they're going up in the building, when they got about halfway up, the owners on the first few floors are saying, wait a minute, you just painted my railings, but now they're all getting splatter from the guys above me. So if the association at that point had said, you know what, this contractor here, if you're making that silly of a mistake, that egregious of a mistake, let's cut ties and get rid of them. They didn't. They let them start over again. They went to the top of the building. They came all the way down. By the time that they went back up to the top building, they realized that they didn't do the powder coating properly, and so the painting was flaking. So what should have taken about 18 months to complete took about 3.5 years to get the project completed.
Wow.
They ended up having to sue their contractor anyways. They ended up having to get another contractor to come in and do the project. So again, it kind of shows you, make sure you know who you have as your contractor, make sure they're being overseen properly. And if they do a mistake that is that egregious, just rip off the Band-Aid and go forward.
Correct. You can never make up these stories, I tell you. There's never a boring time at the table with my wife, I can tell you that much. So Sammy, I mean, Frank gave us some really good insight of the challenges that arise, with contractors. I'm sure you come across them as well. What are some of the tips, I guess, that you could give the managers and the boards of, some of the challenges that you go through so that, we as managers can either avoid it, or as well as board members, or to know we need to have that open and honest conversation as we were discussing earlier?
So I may be a little bit biased here, but hire a good engineer. Yeah. Hire an engineer that you trust, because ultimately the bond between the association and the engineer is built on trust. If there's no trust there, there's nothing to be had. The way you do that, you interview your engineers. You ask other associations what, if they've worked with them. Usually the engineers can provide a list of references for other properties that they've worked with doing a similar project. Call those properties up, see how they work. Talk to your property manager. We have relationships with all the property managers here in South Florida, all the major management companies. So, somebody somewhere will have worked with us at some point. Mm-hmm. And if you have an attorney like Frank, talk to Frank, get their recommendations, see what they have to say. Again, we've worked with Haber Law extensively. We've worked with several other law firms extensively. So they know what we're about. And that's your first step. Hiring an engineer you trust, because that's who's going to be in your ring. That's who's going to be on your side when we're looking at change orders, we're looking at pay apps, we're making sure that you're covered. Then you also want to vet your contractors. Do the same thing. Get several contractors to bid, interview them, have them walk the site, talk to them, talk to your property managers, talk to your attorneys, talk to your engineers, get a list of references from them, go by the properties that they reference, do a little drive-by, check out the building, and you'll be able to see the results of their work. Call the property, talk to them, say, hey, we see you did a project with this construction firm. What do you think? How were they? Those are your two best things. Then one of my big suggestions is maintaining your reserves, making sure that before you come into a major construction project that you have your finances sorted. Whether you're doing a special assessment, whether you're doing a loan, whatever the case is, make sure that is locked down before you begin this process, because you need to know how much money you have in your bank before you can start bidding this out. If you start bidding it out and you're looking at a $4 million project, but you only got $1 million to work with, that's a problem. And then there's also, don't wait. Engineering firms are getting busier and busier by the day. Contractors are getting busier and busier by the day. Lawyers are getting busier and busier by the day. You want to start something, we recommend you get on that as quickly as possible, especially now, and especially going into 2024. Yep. It's only going to get busier.
Yep. You have many associations, as we were talking earlier prior to the webinar, you have many associations that haven't started the process. They're under some belief that changes are coming to the lawn, and the reality of the situation is that there is no discussion of any changes coming, in the sense of, okay, we're going to extend it another 5 years. The bill is coming due, and it needs to be paid. So taking the necessary steps is important. If you haven't done so, it doesn't mean panic. It just means you got to start lining up your ducks and getting it done. I want to address this question here. It's pretty simple for you, Sammy. It asks, with regards to the milestone inspections, does it entail anything with electrical or plumbing evaluation?
So the state mandated milestone evaluation does not. It's just strictly structural. Now, if you're in Broward or Miami-Dade, they basically took their 40-year recertification and bumped that back to 25 and 30 years, depending on where your property is. So that does involve an electrical evaluation, but no plumbing. So there's no plumbing evaluation required. But, you take a look at it as part of your structural integrity reserve study, but it's not a full evaluation.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Thank you for that. So with regards to, we're getting close up on wrapping up the webinar. So I wanted to touch up on what you're seeing, Sammy, bring it back with regards to the structural integrity reserves. I know we were talking a little bit before that, you're seeing a little bit of everything when it comes to the shock with some homeowners, or sorry, I should say board members, because you deal more with the board members. What's been your experience so far with the structural integrity reserves? Are you seeing some associations that they're just thrown back, that they can't, comprehend the cost? Or what are you seeing out on the market?
It ultimately comes down to the healthier reserves prior to this. If you had healthy reserves, you shouldn't have too much of a problem. You may see a slight increase, but it shouldn't be a shock. If you're not maintaining healthy reserves, you're going to be shocked. Very much so. And that's the purpose of this. That's the purpose of this law, is to make sure that these buildings are well funded, to make sure that they can do the proper maintenance on these buildings and they have that money available.
Excellent. And Frank, I know we were talking a little bit of offline. What are you seeing from your clients when they're hit with this structural integrity? Are you seeing that they're dealing with it? Are they concerned? Or, I mean, I know your firm was recently showcased on, I believe, and you said on WSVN. Maybe you can tell a little bit about that story.
Yeah, so it was actually the tale of two different buildings. One building is close to the shore, another building is more inland, and I think the title of the piece was Paradise Lost. And the significance of it is, and I think it's going to be an issue that a lot of buildings are going to be dealing with. If you're talking about a building that is, we'll consider, high-end luxury type building, well, these reserve studies and the financial impact will be probably absorbed. There may be some pushback, but at the end of the day, they'll be absorbed. But a majority of the buildings that are sort of more inland, that are not luxury high-end condos, these that have residents who are living on a certain fixed income, when the reserve study comes back and says, well, now your maintenance obligation goes up by 2, 3, 4 times what it was before, that has a significant impact on that family, on those families. And we are getting to a point now where what happens with these buildings, we're talking offline about, there's something called terminations of the associations. And it used to be that if you had a property that was being terminated, that would be a developer coming in, and for the most part, you get premium dollars on that termination because they want to use that particular land to develop something else. You would get some premium dollars on your investment or your property. But with so many properties facing this decision of, I can't pay for these assessments, they're just too high, and the property then ends up going into either bankruptcy or termination, well, what incentive do these developers are going to have to pay a premium for those properties? That's a thing that a lot of clients are dealing with right now. A lot of issues that we're seeing. I think the piece talks about that, and there's, I think it's an investigative piece. There's a few more episodes that are going to be coming out, but I think the reserve study is not going to go anywhere. I think it's here to stay. I think following Champlain, I don't think that we can go back to the days of kicking these reserves funding down the road, because the risk is just too high. But those folks that are in a position where they cannot afford it, we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that on a moving forward basis.
Yeah, it's the truth of what's coming. For, as Sammy said, not for all associations, but probably for a majority. I think that solutions are going to need to arise, and that's the way I've always looked at things in life. That way is, all right, we have this problem, how can we solve it? And I know, Frank, you and I sit on the board at the LBA, Latin Builders Association, and there could be an opportunity for for those infill projects of maybe rezoning, where it'll make sense for the developer to come in, buy out these units, and then allow for a higher zoning so that we can build the affordable housing that our city needs. So there's solutions. We just can't get focused on just the challenge. The reality of the situation is I can tell you from a management side that when a board has the funds, they make the right decisions. The challenge comes when they don't have the reserves and they procrastinate. And it's not that they don't want to do it. In many cases, they really do. But it's very difficult to be a volunteer, to live in the property, and then to tell the owners, by the way, you need to pay me $25,000 to fix this building, which wasn't that person's fault because this happened for years, but it's their responsibility to deal with today. So, the legislation, unfortunately, the way it came, there's nothing we can do. We had that tragedy. So we need to pay it to those individuals that lost their lives and make sure that this never happens again. And the only way of that happening is, number one, that they have the money to do it. And the requirements are there for engineers to inspect these buildings the way they need to be inspected. And then we avoid this from ever happening in the future. So it is very sad because there are many people in fixed income. And I think the way they phrase it, lost paradise is the way to phrase that. But that's now what it's going to cost to live here in South Florida. And I think it's just going to get more difficult with the way, storms and everything and insurance. We'll have to work through it. This is where opportunities always arise. This is where entrepreneurs always flourish. When you have a big problem, there's going to be a solution. That's at least my philosophy to these things. So I want to give you guys an opportunity to at least provide 1, 2, maybe 3 golden nuggets of what our managers or board members can take with them today. Sammy, I guess I'll start with you because I started with Frank when we started the webinar.
I mentioned this before. If you're going to a construction project, hire an engineer you trust, vet your contractors, make sure you have your funding in line, and don't wait. The biggest thing, the main thing I can tell you right now, cracks don't get smaller. Be preemptive on your maintenance. Don't push things down the road because it's only going to get more expensive.
Excellent. Thank you, Sammy. Frank?
Yeah, I agree with Sammy's points. I think they're excellent. The only thing I would add to that is at the very beginning of your project, make sure you have your schedule. Defend your schedule. Don't let your schedule get out of hand. Don't let a 2-year project become a 10-year project. And the way you do that is making sure that your team is on board with that. Having the proper team, we talked about that. And the only other thing that I recommend to the board, to the managers, is communicate with all the owners. Let them know how their project is going. Let them know what's being done so that there's no resentment or surprises at any board meeting that you're coming in. You have a handful of owners saying, what the heck is going on? You want to make sure that you are communicating and providing them all the information in real time as much as possible so that everybody knows what's going on.
Excellent. Great points there, Frank. And what I want to add is what we've said throughout the webinar is just really working with your partners. Selecting the right partners on the onset, as you've heard from all 3 of us, is critical. You should take your time in doing that. And as Frank said, the communication, especially for us managers, you can never over communicate. It's better to keep your residents informed. And don't be afraid to have that honest conversation with your board, to invite your engineer into this meeting, to invite the attorney into this meeting, especially nowadays that we can do it over Zoom. So the cost will be a little bit less so that they can relay the information that needs to be relayed. Let the professionals do what the professionals do. And lastly, it really has to do with having a positive outlook. It's difficult dealing with these situations for both board members and managers. But ultimately, going through the SIRS, going through the milestones, as I said earlier, it's going to be difficult for the next few years. But once we get through it, people have amnesia and they forget what the cost was. And now we're in a better position to really do what's necessary for the buildings and for the residents that we serve. So I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. We did our best to keep it exactly at 1 hour. Before we leave, I want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Even though it's next week, but we won't have a webinar till December. And I hope to see you in our next webinar. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.